Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming here today for the first conference of our public program, Media Explosion, What is Like to Be Human Today. As you probably know, we are under the framework of a special public program of La Triennale di Milano, Triennale Upside Down, and this is a new cooperation of La Triennale Milano and the new Academy of Fine Arts. This is the first of four special lecture. The first speaker today is Joanna Zylinska, and the second speaker will be Stefano Quintarelli, and after Margaret Atwood and the end Lev Manovic. For me, as a former curator of public program at La Triennale di Milano and also an adjunct professor of aesthetics at the new Academy of Fine Arts, it's an incredible pleasure to introduce you this first conference. But first of all, I would like to say thanks to Professor Amos Bianchi, that was the real creator of this public program in cooperation that is also under the framework of the school and the area of media design and technology of the new Academy of Fine Arts. So Amos, thank you again. This is a pleasure also for the all curator of La Triennale di Milano to have this opportunity of this conference today, and thanks again also Joanna Zylinska to stay with us today.
Thank you, Leonardo. Just a few words about what how are we trying to do with these conferences. You know, we start talking about it 1 year ago. Okay, 1 year ago before the coronavirus, and then we stopped. But at the end of the last year, we felt the necessity to have a digital edition of about the topics we were aimed to propose to our mostly Italian audience, to our students. You know, we are really living an era where the pressure that's coming from the explosion of digital media is growing. And it's not easy to have very steady points about the digital world surrounding us. We are really in a period of acceleration. Whoever we are, educators, academics, practitioners, designers, students, there was kind of need, okay, to provide new perspectives, even to us who are in the field of digital media, to understand, okay, to really try to clarify what's really happening. And so really it was a pleasure, this link with between NABA and Triennale, to create this cycle of conferences. Some institutional thanks are absolutely due in this moment. It will be the first and only time, because behind this specific conference and the cycle, we have the work of several people, and I'd like to name them: Stefano Boeri, President of Triennale; Lorenza Baroncelli, Artistic Director; Damiano Gulli, Head Curator of Public Program; Marco Martello, Digital Manager. And for NABA, the colleagues of my area: Vincenzo Cucci, Emanuele Lomello, Stefania Carbonara. We are a team of media and new technologies. Luca Poncellini and Guido Tattoni, head of the Applied Arts Department and head of school, and Francesca Zocchi, Ginevra Stuto, and Ilaria Polimeni from the Digital Communication and Institutional Relationships of NABA, who really supported us in creating this this cycle of conference. And I'd like to thank a lot our public tonight. I saw a lot of students, and when we created with Leonardo with this program, we supposed that, okay, we want to really have students in this cycle of conference, because it's hard. We need more hints, we need more ideas to clarify the moment we are living. And so tonight, our first guest, thank you very much, is Joanna Zylinska, writer, lecturer, artist, curator from Goldsmith University in London. She wrote in the last years some very meaningful books. And I like to quote just The End of Man, a feminist counter-apocalypse, and Non-Human Photography. And the most recent one is AI art, machine visions, and warped dreams that has inspired, as Joanna Zylinska is going to expose us, this conference whose title is AI Art on Human and Machine Creativity. And so, thank you, Leonardo. Thank you, Professor Zylinska. I leave the word to you to start to open this cycle of conferences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I also wanted to start from a few words of thanks. I wanted to thank Professor Amos Bianchi and Professor Leonardo Capo for inviting me. And a big thank you to the Triennale and to NABA as well for hosting me, to the attendees. And let me just start properly now. And let's hope the tech behaves itself. It's always nerve-wracking giving a talk on technology and sophisticated kind of neural networks, and the basic things don't work from my side, but I hope they do. So just give me a second. I'm going to share the screen with you and okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking to you today about human and machine creativity. By way of sketching out the subject of today's lecture, I wanted to introduce myself properly to you, to explain a little bit what I do and to say why I do it and how I do it. So this is me at an exhibition on artificial intelligence at the Barbican in London a couple of years ago. As you can see, the YOLO algorithm, that little squares that appear there, used in that display, thinks that there is only 40% chance that I'm a person, while other visitors were getting scores of 84% and more. Now, in this next image, you can see how I'm failing at digital subjectivity, being misrecognized by an algorithm on the basis of my basically non-existent data footprint from my social media. Both photographs foreground the fact that today we are constantly being seen, imaged, and reimagined by machines, from CCTV through to medical imaging and laptop webcams, as in now, where we all exist as moving pictures for one another on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So my lecture today will discuss the role of machines in the construction of our identity as subjects, artists, designers, workers, or students, and as citizens in the age of increasing automation of many spheres of life. The technology of artificial intelligence, I'll be calling AI for short, will be seen as key to this automation. I will then look to art as a domain in which interesting questions can be raised for and about AI. Finally, the goal of my talk will be to ask questions about the actual spaces and institutions where thinking and learning about technology and creativity takes place: the modern university, the liberal arts college, the art and design school. Now, to give you a bit kind of further context for where I'm coming from, the primary concern of my work over the years has been the constitution of the human as both a species and a historical subject. Adopting the geological probe of deep time, I have looked at the emergence of the human in conjunction with the surrounding technologies and artifacts, tools such as stones used as hammers, or more sophisticated ones such as computers, language, art. I have also explored the entanglements of human and non-human forms of intelligence and perception. And this set of interests is what connects my recent writings: non-human photography, The End of Man, and AI art. Now, the planetary perspective of my work, as adopted in this video, Exit Man, which is now playing silently in the background, finds its anchoring in the socio-political concerns of the here and now, primarily the ecological and economic crises, but also the gendering and racialization of the apocalyptic narratives brought in as responses to those crises. Now, as well as looking into the human and non-human past, I'm interested in the future of the human and of the human habitat. And that's perhaps a good question to raise, the question of the future in the context of kind of coronavirus and the global pandemic. My method of working combines philosophical inquiry with artistic practice, which involves still and moving images. I see this hybrid mode of inquiry as being more conducive to the interrogation of complex issues that need to be thought about, sensed, and encountered as part of the same cognitive space. By looking from below, around, and askew, I aim to offer a critical vision that refracts the current images of the world as we know it, and that offers a glimpse of a world to come. Now, my lecture today picks up some threads from my newly published book, AI Art, Machine Visions and Warped Dreams. And now it's a big shout out here to my colleagues at Open Humanities Press, which is a scholar-led non-profit publishing collective whose aim is to make works of critical theory available to all for free. So you can go and have a look at the website. There are lots of free books there, also about art, culture, and technology. Anyway, the book discusses the relationship between AI, creativity, and invention. The impetus for writing it was provided by my witnessing a real outpouring of computer-made artifacts at art festivals over the last few years. For example, computer-generated paintings that resembled Vincent van Gogh's work, or abstract modernist masterpieces, or Microsoft ordering the production of a new Rembrandt. This kind of deluge of so-called artificial intelligence art has been taking place against a wider debate about AI unfolding in society, where the public has shown fascination with what AI can do and create, but also fear connected with the automation of the labor force and the potential elimination of people from their jobs, or even the annihilation of the human species. Now, for me, the stories that accompany the rise of AI and the talk about AI's creativity and the potential threats have been at least as interesting as the actual artifacts that are being produced under the umbrella of AI art. So my book responds to this moment, to this production of many different things labeled, rightly or wrongly, AI art. My aim was to interrogate this term and explore the confluence of ideas, beliefs, and socio-political forces behind it. And to do so, I wanted to go beyond the question of whether computers can be creative or not. So when people think about AI and computer art, this is the question that often gets raised. Now, I do make an attempt to answer it, but I also try to show why this is not the best question to ask. And that will not really get us anywhere to ask whether computers or robots are creative or not. Instead, I propose to ask some other, and I think more important questions. For example, should the recent use of AI in image making and image curation encourage us to ask some bigger questions about the very purpose of artistic production? Does it encourage us to interrogate once again what art is for? Who is art for? Who is the artist now? What is the nature of the art market and art institution? Can technology and AI challenge the status quo in any way? Does AI create new conditions and new audiences for art? And what will art after AI look like? Who will it be for? So you could say that the book is intended as a provocation or as an invitation to a discussion, but I do more than just ask questions. The book also carries a critique, but not in the sense that I want to tell people that AI is really bad and we should also all be afraid, although maybe we should be a little bit. But my position doesn't involve a total rejection of AI as a technology or as a concept. On the contrary, my work comes from the place of fascination, a fascination with the possibilities, narratives, and technical incarnations of AI. But at the same time, I'm quite suspicious about the current social and political claims made about AI, and also about the role of art and validating those claims sometimes. So as part of this, I'm concerned about some dominant forms of AI aesthetics with their frequent visual banality, but more importantly, about the service that this kind of banal but often garish art often gets put to, which is legitimating platform capitalism through the application of psychopolitics. This form of art ends up enacting what Franco Bifo Berardi has called neurototalitarianism, where our minds and bodies are being colonized by GANs, which are generative adversarial networks, and by their visual acrobatics. So they kind of algorithms looked to produce the thing that is in my background and that I also use in my work. But I'm also slightly suspicious about certain uses of GANs. Hence, the book offers a critique of this form of capitalism by asking us to what extent AI art is mobilized to enact and enforce this particular political formation, this neurototalitarianism, in which we are all kind of mimed into submission. And it asks us if we can do things otherwise in art and in politics. And indeed, today, much of AI art that gets attention from curators and audiences is what we could describe platform capitalism art, propped up by the generative and extractivist logic of Silicon Valley. It generates visual and algorithmic variations within the enclosed system while teasing the public with the promise of novelty. Kindly put, much of generative AI art celebrates the technological novelty of computer vision, fast processing power, and connection-making algorithms by regaling us with a dazzling spectacle of colors and contrasts, as well as the sheer volume of data. Unkindly put, it becomes a glorified version of Candy Crush that seductively maims our bodies into submission. Art that draws on deep learning and big data set to get computers to do something supposedly interesting with images often ends up offering a mere psychedelic sea of squiggles, giggles, and not very much in between. It can be fascinating because it's so disorienting. So we're not really sure how to look at it. It looks uncanny and it challenges our perception. But it is, first of all, art as spectacle. So producing works like that, those of Van Gogh or Francis Bacon, opens an interesting debate about our conventionally accepted parameters of authorship, originality, expertise, and taste. So the new scientist has raised an important philosophical question with regard to simulation works. If it's so easy to break down the style of some of the world's most original composers or artists into computer code, that means some of the best human artists are more machine-like than we would like to think. A similar line of thinking was offered by philosopher of technology Willem Flusser, who argued that since the times of the Industrial Revolution, image makers have existed in a close-knit relationship with their apparatuses, facilitating a kind of new kind of collaboration. So for Flusser, it was a new kind of function in which human beings and apparatus merged into a unity. Flusser was writing about photographers, but his argument extends to other forms of human creativity. This human-machine unity meant for Flusser that humans now function as a function of their apparatuses. Think about, I know that most of you in the audience are probably artists, designers, but also think about the relationship you have with your phone. And no matter if you're an artist, whether you professionally work with images or not, and think to what extent you use your phone and to what extent your phone and the whole infrastructure to which it is connected, it uses you. So that, phrase from Flusser, written sometime in the 80s, that humans function as a function of apparatuses, suddenly has become very prescient. So our creative activity is therefore understood as an execution of the machine's program and involves making a selection from the range of options determined by the algorithm. We could suggest that this algorithmic constitution of humans started long before the Industrial Revolution, or even that it has been foundational to the constitution of the human, as a technical being, who actuated or realized this humanness, this being human, in relation with technical objects, such as fire, sticks, and stones. Now, they are very early technical objects, but they are technical objects nevertheless. Humans' everyday functioning also depends on the execution of a program, a sequence of possibilities enabled by various couplings of adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, that is DNA. Now, this proposition shouldn't be taken as a postulation of a mindless technological or biological determinism that would remove from humans any possibility of action and any responsibility for the actions we take. Yet accepting our affinity with other living beings across the evolutionary spectrum and recognizing that our human lives are subject to biochemical reactions that we are not fully in control of, from blushing through to aging and dying, does undermine the humanist parameters of the debate about creativity, art, and AI. Now, disallowing the strict caesura or gap between humans and robots, machines, our supposed genius and artificial intelligence, such a post-human view of the human recalibrates human creativity as partly computational. Once again, to say this is not to resign ourselves to passivity by concluding that we humans are incapable of creating anything, that we are nothing but machines, clockwork devices responding to impulses. I'm not saying that. Flusser is not saying that. It's only to agree, after Flusser, that just as the imagination of the machine, of the apparatus, is greater than that of all artists across history, the imagination of the program called life, encapsulated here in the double helix, the program in which we all participate, and which is an outcome of multiple processes running across various scales of the universe, that this far exceeds our human imagination. We don't yet know what a body can do, as Spinoza said. We don't yet know what life can do. To understand how humans can operate within the constraints of the apparatus that is part of them becomes a new and urgent task for a much needed post-humanist art theory. In this new paradigm for understanding art and creativity more broadly, the human would be understood as part of the machine, dispositif, or technical system, and not its sole inventor, owner, and ruler. A post-humanist art history would see instead the production of all artworks, from cave paintings through to the works of so-called great masters, and contemporary experiments with all kinds of technologies, as being produced by human artists in an assembly with a plethora of non-human agents, drives, impulses, viruses, drugs, various organic and non-organic substances and devices, as well as all sorts of networks, from mycelium or the kind of mushroom network, if you like, running under our feet, through to the internet. The frequently posed question, therefore, can computers be creative, which I mentioned earlier, therefore reveals itself to be rather reductive, because it's premised on a pre-technological idea of the human as a standalone subject of decision and action. The computer, the machine, be it in the shape of a PC or an algorithm, is only seen here as an imperfect approximation of such a human. Therefore, we are better off asking, after Flusser, whether the human can actually be creative, or more precisely, in what way can the human be creative? Now, many artists have been asking these questions for years, experimenting with questions of human and machine creativity in a way that goes beyond the humanist paradigm. Robot Art by Lionel Mora is an ensemble of small robotic vehicles traversing a large sheet of paper and leaving multicolored line marks on it to create a large abstraction. Mora explains that his robots have been equipped with environmental awareness and a small brain that runs algorithms based on simple rules. The images obtained are not designed in advance, but are rather the result of randomness and communication between the robots on the canvas. So the artist's principal interest lies in exploring complexity in art, produced in collaboration with robots. And then Mora himself says, whether a work of art is made directly by a human artist or is the product of any other type of process is nowadays of no relevance. More decisive is whether or not a new art form expands the field of art. Since robots like those I use are able to generate novelty, he says, it must also be recognized that they have at least some degree of creativity. So I found that provocation, that statement, very interesting. Mora seems to be partially resigning here from the role of the artist and giving up the creative ground, or giving it to the machine and the algorithm. But it's only a very particular, arguably old-fashioned and masculinist idea of the artist as a creative genius at odds with the world, one who's also standing above the world, that is being challenged here. The robotic artist unveiled by Mora and his predecessors is of the world. He or she, as the case may be in many current experiments with AI art, is also in the world. There is therefore a subtle socio-political message implied in this repositioning too. Now, another example, artist Katya Novitskova's work is also worth highlighting in this respect when it comes to these human-machine entanglements. Her recent project feels like a spoof version of the artificially intelligent work which mesmerizes and seduces the viewer. It's been shown in lots of different places. Some of you might have seen it at Venice Biennale a few years ago, was shown in Estonia, it was shown in London at the Whitechapel Gallery. Yet there is no visual seduction as such, but the visitor instead, to a strange archive of images and objects, is faced with a set of puzzles. What are these electronic cradles doing? And what's happening to the human babies they were meant to be cradling? What do the alien-like creatures hovering above them stand for? Novitskova's post-internet dystopia has been described by Toke Lickerberg as art for another intelligence. I love this phrase, art for another intelligence. The artifacts included in the exhibition may cause a sense of information overload in a human visitor, but algorithms will be able to detect immediately what a given piece of data indicates. Novitskova's work offers a premonition of the world to come, a world in which not only the majority of the images are not being taken with a human viewer in mind, as Trevor Paglen has pointed out recently, but also one in which machines constantly perceive, communicate with, and exist for other machines. We could therefore perhaps suggest that, drawing on non-human databases and modes of perception, Novitskova creates work for an artificial intelligence which is not here yet, inviting a speculation on the future of different species. AI here stands for another intelligence. So as well as producing a theoretical argument as part of this project on AI art, my contribution to the inquiry into human and machine creativity and intelligence has taken the form of a photographic project that has engaged with artificial intelligence. Now, this term is what Amazon, the company Amazon, has been informally calling its Mechanical Turk platform, which is an online marketplace connecting labor suppliers with providers worldwide. The labors here consist of hits, which are human intelligence tasks, usually inviting simple mechanical actions performed on digital data, such as tagging photographs or filling in surveys, priced very cheaply from a tenth to a quarter of a cent per task on average. Mechanical Turk basically puts humans in the role of machines because it would be too impractical and too costly to program a computer to do such kind of repetitive, pointless tasks. Now, in a somewhat uncanny anticipation of the world become window situation of coronavirus capitalism, in 2018, I commissioned 100 M-Turkers, mechanical Turkers, which they're called, to take one photo of a view from a window of the room they were in at the time. And I'm going to show you the project. Let it play for a moment. Okay, so the instructions clearly stipulated that if there was no room in the window, people should go to the next available room with a window and take a photo from there. They were also asked not to upload stock photos, existing images from the web, or their old photographs. I explained to those workers that this product, this task I was buying, was for a research and art project which studied human and machine creativity. Post-processing was allowed, though not required. The hit was priced at double the US living wage per hour, which probably explains why all the tasks had been snapped up and fulfilled almost immediately. Although given that the task was to take 1 to 2 minutes on average, precisely because I wanted a somewhat automatic production of the scene produced by time-poor humans, together with their heavily automated phone cameras, it was hardly alleviating world poverty. Indeed, I'm aware that the very act of using Turkers for this project was not unproblematic and can actually be said to be perpetuating unfair labor conditions worldwide by validating Amazon's platform. And the exploration of these conditions also forms the fabric of my project. Now, I don't know where the Turkers that responded to my call came from, although it's possible to make some guesses from the images themselves, using signage, architecture, and vegetation as signposts. However, from a 2018 academic study, we learned that most of the Turk workers are from the USA, 3/4, with India being second, followed by Canada, Great Britain, Philippines, and Germany. Although the composition of a group of available workers at any one time is also clearly dependent on what time it is in different time zones when people are available when you obviously try to hire them. This is because even though many of the tasks available on the platform are very simple, they require a command of the English language to understand and perform them, which puts native and near-native speakers at an advantage. Turkers operate anonymously and are only identified through their assigned number, creating an illusion of a fluid mobile labor force that forms part of a digital cloud. The idea behind my project was to rematerialize the cloudy vapor behind this narrative of, kind of digital labor, it's also online, it's all in the cloud, by creating a group portrait of Turkers' locations. But neither conventional portrait nor landscape photography, the collective image base of view from the window offers instead a non-comprehensive demographic snapshot of the global workforce looking out. The concept and the title entail a return to the mythical first photo in the history of photography, Joseph Nicephore Niepce's view from the window at Le Gras. Due to the limited sensitivity of photographic materials, the pewter plate covered with bitumen at the time, Niepce's image of a view from a window of his country house in Bourgogne in France took 8 hours to expose. And it resulted in a scene which the human eye could never see, with sunlight and shadow being visible on 2 sides of the building, at left and right. And just to say that this is the same picture. The one on the left is the actual plate. You might have seen it some, museums. And the one on the right is when scientists try to extract something from the image and make it a bit more visible. So, and this is so-called first photograph in the history of photography. And I'm saying so-called because it's all the firsts. There are a lot of claims to origins and you can never be really quite sure. So this so-called first image in the history of photography therefore presents a distinctly non-human vision. It's like 8 hours, shadows on both sides, something while enacting a non-human agency at the heart of its production. And it's also the reason I chose Niepce's image as a conceptual frame for my Turk project. So the artificial intelligence of Amazon's invisible and distributed labor force can therefore be described as undigital, in the sense that even though it uses digital technology to perform at least partially digital tasks, simulating the work of machines and its quiet efficacy, it also raptures the seamless narrative and visualization of the machinic world. It does this by bringing the material traces of human bodies and their locations into the picture, literally. So the view from the window shows us that there is a window in the first place, or not. This window is not just a rectangular visualization of the software interface patented by Microsoft and used by other operating systems as part of the user-friendly kind of user interface, but also a metal or wooden frame holding a glass pane, occasionally also curtains, shutters, mosquito nets, that brings in the outside world, while also keeping it at bay precisely as the outside, the place in which the person is not. And obviously the whole kind of project gains, as I mentioned, some uncanny dimension now that we are all living as a kind of square rectangles, that we all become photographs, images, looking out of windows, and windows in our houses where, you know, a lockdown happens. And now in England, in London, we are in lockdown number 3 at the moment, but also looking at, you know, at one another through windows of Zoom and other platforms. In her book, provocatively titled Artificial Unintelligence, which deals with a misguided belief that computation can solve all complex social issues, Meredith Broussard argues that how you define AI depends on what you want to believe about the future. Yet, unlike Broussard's effort to humanize technology and bring the human back to the center of the technological assembly, my view from the window doesn't aim to simply humanize techne. For me, such a well-meaning effort can only be misguided because it's premised on the severing of the constitutive relationship with technology that we've always had, as I said earlier, starting from early technologies such as stones used as hammers and, you know, ropes and things like that, fire. But what it does offer is a different vantage point for perceiving this relationship at this particular moment in time, and more importantly, a recognition that there is a vantage point, and that the view from nowhere, as Donna Haraway puts it, promoted by a lot of AI designers, ends up putting a very specific white male ahistorical human in the picture. So view from the window also suggests that, as well as break through the glass ceiling, and digital workers may be ready at any time to start smashing their virtual windows. So that would be kind of an interesting AI breakout that many AI researchers are scared of. And that brings me to the section of my talk called an Uber for Art. And something that might, again, appeal as a concept, maybe something to be scared of or excited about, depending on where you stand when you are kind of an artist, a designer. Given that the tasks required by Amazon's low-price anonymous laborers are infinite, it's understandable why artists may flock to the platform, this MTurk, driven by opportunism, curiosity, or a desire to unveil the hidden conditions of global labor in the digital age. Artists who've worked with the platform have done a lot of things. They've asked MTurk to draw a sheep facing to the left that later made up a large tapestry. Others, I asked them to paint small sections of a $100 bill without realizing that they were all contributing to a large picture in every sense of the word. They were both projects by Aaron Koblin. Others have asked people to photograph themselves holding a sign which revealed why they did this work, anti-bio. And others even asked them to write poetry. There is, of course, a long history of artists exploring the multiple dimensions of creativity while challenging their own singular role in the process by crowdsourcing their works, from Andrea Breton's Exquisite Corpse, which involved collectively assembling words or images, through to mail art and smart mobs. But what's new about using Mechanical Turk is that the crowdsourced art is really an outcome of extremely cheap labor undertaken by those who rely on Amazon's platform for income, rather than of playful participation in a shared activity. So this artificial intelligence of the Turk labor force is both a representation of a labor ideal in the times of global capital flows and a premonition of things to come for the majority of workers in the majority of jobs and careers. Yet the worry that AI-driven robots will take over, that they are going to replace us, is often dismissed by techno-capitalists with a breezy reassurance that new jobs will be created, poverty diminished, and that as a result of widespread automation, we will simply have more time. And obviously that argument is found particularly wanting in the aftermath of coronavirus and the rising in price of a lot of these companies and the loss of many other jobs which were much more on the ground. So the rebranding of unemployment and precarity as freedom sounds particularly ominous in the positive reports about the supposed desirability of the gig economy with its flexibility for all. So this problem of underemployment and unemployment by companies such as Amazon Turk, but also Uber, also Deliveroo and others, affects not only workers on labor sourcing platforms such as Crowdflower, Clickworker, Tuluna, Fiverr, also other actors of the disruptive gig economy bankrolled by Silicon Valley capital, such as Uber and Deliveroo drivers, 0 hours contract shop assistants, and finally, casualized academic staff working only on hourly contracts. Academic Darren Werschler's afterword to Nick Thurston's book of the subcontract, which is this book of poetry, also commissioned via the platform MTurk, makes an important suggestion with regard to the force of such projects. More than as a critique of a particular form of creativity with all its forms and conventions, or even of the economics of MTurk, he suggests Thurston's projects should be read as an institutional critique of the conditions of the production of art today, with the fame and glory attached to the singular auteur, singular genius, but with the labor and infrastructure provided by the Legion. Now, this applies to fine art made by the likes of Damien Hirst, to which, of course, there are historical antecedents predating the era of industrial capitalism, as much as it does to fashion, design, or entertainment media. Now, Werschler proposes to read this book of the subcontract not as a solution, but as a symptom of the age in which all sorts of activities, including poetry writing, are reconfigured as automatic human intelligence tasks. This goes hand in hand with the full automation of typically human creative tasks today, such as reporting, journalism, data analysis, with the increasing list of jobs and careers being threatened to be lost to AI. Because AI write quite viable reports these days. Poets and professors can point to this change, says Werschler, but so far haven't been able to move beyond it. And as we are beginning to realize, our tasks too, as artists, as poets, can be outsourced. This state of events, deemed the Uberification of the university, Uberification of academia by Gary Hall, hints at a near future in which we all become entrepreneurs of the self, with every aspect of our lives, from inhabiting a room or sleeping on someone's sofa, making friends and dating, through to walking, monetized, both as a shareable good and a data point. If we were in the same room, I would ask how many of you have got Fitbits on your wrist and how you're monetizing walking as well in many places, and in the US, for example, to get discounts on insurance. So any wealth generated as part of this so-called sharing economy, writes Hall, is concentrated in the hands of relatively few, who also centrally control the platform, software, algorithm, data, and associated ecosystem, deciding on pricing and wage levels, work allocation, standards, conditions, and preferred user and labor profiles. So obviously we know how well Amazon has done in the pandemic, but Hall offers more than just a critique of the precarious labor conditions in the digital economy for creatives, for academics, for artists, or of the extension of these conditions to professions and careers that were previously seen as safe from the disruptive logic of its algorithms, poets and professors. He also issues a call to arms aimed at those in higher education, highlighting that the university, or we can broadly say also the humanities or arts education, art and design education, that are, one of the few spaces in post-industrial society where the forces of contemporary neoliberalism, anti-public sector regime are still being overtly opposed, to a certain extent at least. Now, the most important question we are posed with here is not therefore whether robots or algorithms can replace us as artists, photographers, poets, and professors. Although to answer that less important question, they surely can, by being able to produce singular artifacts that will take us in, evoke the sensation of beauty, become popular, or even sell well, and by producing online books, classes, whole courses made up of the existing and rehashed content that will do, for a while at least. The question rather is how to create conditions in which creativity with its accompanying institutions, especially those not driven by the logic of profit, capital, and innovation, such as public universities, such as gallery spaces, those with the kind of outlier critical subjects, such as visual culture, foreign languages, subjects that are less directly instrumental. And how about art schools, state-owned galleries, museums, cultural centers? How do we ensure that they still count for us embodied humans with material and other needs? Not just count, because they surely do count. How do we ensure that they exist? Another important question, or question that's gained double importance in the light of the pandemic. So this defense of art practices and institutions for the human, on my part here, has nothing to do with residual humanism, a desire to preserve our uniqueness, sense of beauty, or any other humanist niceties of this kind. But it has to do with asking poets and professors, artists and photographers to keep fighting against the uberification of the university and the art school, of knowledge production and art production. With a view from the window and the wider project of digital photography, I want to show that even though we are all entangled in algorithms, it matters how we use them, what visions and vistas they will be made to produce, who will get to see them, who or what will take the picture, of what, in what circumstances, to what purpose, and for what price. Building on the legacy of the term in computer science, this kind of project of undigitality becomes for me a way of reframing the picture after it's been taken, of refocusing and resuming on what matters and rethinking what matters to begin with. It's also a way of seeing image making as a kind of practice that is quintessentially unfinished, moving beyond the uniqueness of the single image on a gallery wall or the predictability of the Instagram flow. And digital imaging becomes an ethical political opening towards the unknown, coupled with a demand for this knowledge not to be computed too quickly. Now, I finished making the project in 2018, but it has acquired a new dimension with its premonition of a world behind windows and screens in which we have all become part of a vapor-like global labor force, no matter how creative our occupations or ambitions are. The belief in the wisdom of the crowd associated with the optimism of the early internet era and driven by the spirit of communitarianism and collaboration has lost its shine in the age of global surveillance, digital surveillance, fake news, Twitter bubbles, and the possible election manipulation via social media. The crowd has now been revealed to be not so much wise as moldable and subject to all sorts of exploitation. We have also learned not only that they are really watching us, but also that we are doing it to one another. We are all M-Turks in Jeff Bezos's or Mark Zuckerberg's digital factories, a state of events that has become exacerbated under COVID-19. And this lecture and its format are a testament to the state of events, of course. So crowdsourcing becomes a form of crowd mobbing. And thus, even if I argue that we have always been artificially intelligent in the book, the specific historical and cultural labor practices of humans at a given point in time matter. The broader goal of my work, visual and theoretical therefore, and pedagogic, I'm also a lecturer as well, I teach in art institution, is to interrogate whose interests are being represented and who can afford to be creative, where, when, and for how long. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Zylinska. I don't know, Amos, we can try to open the discussion also with the students, or if you want to start with a question for the Professor Zylinska.
No, absolutely. While we wait for some Q&A, I just remind you that we have a Q&A section, okay, in the bar of Zoom. I thank you, Joanna Zylinska, for this inspiring and very, very dense and challenging, okay, presentation, because really our attitude, okay, in considering what is the relationship between AI and creativity has been really assumed under a different perspective. I just a question, okay? Now we are here. I tell you all the participants, if you want, you can write your question in the Q&A section, and Professor Zylinska, Leonardo, and I are here to debate about your question. And when you quoted Flusser, I want to start from that because I studied with Antonio Cavonia here in Italy. Antonio was used to say, we have always been cyborg. That means we can't at all think about ourselves without considering technology, without considering better the way we deal with the environment surrounding us. There's no pure position of a human being detached from his, her environment. But my question is, really, we are living, let me try to phrase it in a proper way. Are we living an era right now where the digital work, the digital world in the last 25 years was a new step in this process, or really we can study the relationship between human being and the technology, but it's only another moment of such complex issue? I mean, really, we have to think about ourselves in a different way. We live in this specific historical time, or really we are simply part of the huge flow that started probably in Africa some millions of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think that question goes to the heart of my kind of theoretical framing of that kind of understanding of us having always been technical, having been technical beings. And we can find traces of that work, for example, in the writings of the recently deceased French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, or in kind of Gilbert Simondon. We can find that in the art practice of Stellac, who always says, we've always been cyborgs, we've always been zombies, so there is no need to panic. Having said that, so to understand that humans are technical beings, that we've emerged with technology. I mean, Stiegler even has this analysis that we stood on two legs by kind of grabbing something. And obviously, it's a philosophical parable of processes that happened over, thousands of years. But it's kind of makes us understand that we've become who we are in relation with some externality, something outside, be it a stone, a stick, that, and the stone became not just weapon, that became a hammer, but maybe also became a mirror. When we polish that stone, then we could see it's ourselves in it, and we gain kind of consciousness. Again, that didn't happen like overnight, but that sense. So to understand that we've always been technical changes a certain narrative, and it stops us from getting over hysterical about some, understanding of the relation with technology. Having said this, it doesn't mean that not all technologies are created equal, and not all relations should be seen as immediately desirable. So my relationship as a technical being with a technological giant Amazon is not necessarily one that could be understood in the kind of ethical sense as a kind of productive or a beneficial relation. It's certainly beneficial to Amazon, and in some sense, and obviously to me on a daily basis, and obviously I do use Amazon, especially when in lockdown and I need things delivered, and it's one of the providers of kind of basic services. But the kind of broader sense of how society is being reorganized through that technical relationship, we could ask questions about that. And I suppose that's, so how do we on the one hand realize that we are technical beings, and on the other hand ask, does it mean that all technical relations are equally desirable? And of course, the answer is not. And then what kind of tools do we mobilize? And they would be political tools, political standpoints, activism, analysis of, labor conditions, analysis of creativity, analysis of forms of emancipation, to see then, which relationships we want to cultivate and which relationships we might want to say, no, thank you.
Thank you. And when you say we, you mean human beings?
Yes, I mean human beings. And then also, again, because obviously human beings rarely agree on anything, so that we would have to be qualified, and, it would become, you're talking about a group with whom you are kind of working. You are talking here in the academic and artistic context as a group of creatives. You're talking about creating some kind of communities within which there will be conflict, but within which you're still trying to work out the language. But yes, as a we broadly is talking about humans, while also understanding that this kind of conflict or dissensus, to use a more philosophical term, is at the heart of the human kind of community.
Thank you very much.
So, Professor Zylinska, I have a question for you, but before, as you can see probably on the chat, we have a question that comes from Dylan Perrisan. I don't know if you can see the question on chat, but the question is, what do Zylinska think about Gaia? Oh, yes. What kind of relationship we, human beings, can relate with that? I don't know if you want to answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some also further questions up there posed earlier, so maybe we'll go back to them as well. But a question about Gaia. I mean, as a systems theory, Gaia was interesting because when it first, James Lovelock proposed that, and people got a bit panicky thinking, oh, it's all too new age, we should give it up. But then obviously it turned out that his work and the work of biologist Lynn Margulis had a lot to offer in terms of understanding kind of the Earth, our planet, in systemic terms, understanding how different systems are interconnected and how humans themselves are also kind of certain organisms that run on systems. We have even given names of systems to our, circulatory system, neural system. So I think there is a lot to be said for the concept of Gaia as providing that systemic understanding, but also giving something else. Gaia, in that very scientific approach, even though it might sound a bit, say, kind of new agey, it kind of isn't at all. Gaia, that proposition also carries an ethical injunction, a call to others to understand that the planet is our responsibility. So it might seem like a banal thing to say today because everyone is on about the planet and climate change. And yet, of course, it's really important. And for me, and the issues of AI and issues of planetarity in relation to climate change are absolutely interconnected. And I've got a whole section in the book called AI as the Anthropocene Imperative. So it's another AI. So Anthropocene Imperative as an AI calling on us, but also posing a question of how do we live in this kind of new geological era, and whose responsibility is it? And I'm not offering that AI will save us from it, but as the current developments, especially around power use there, around the kind of developments in Silicon Valley, allow something as well. So that would be my answer. I think there were questions earlier on in the chat. Shall I go to them as well?
Sometimes you can see some questions, sometimes just, I don't know, thanks Professor Zylinska for this conference. So it's full of things, but if you want, you can see.
Yeah, but I'm happy to be guided by you, Leonardo. So please,
okay, but
please choose and pick.
Okay. No, I have a question. If I can ask you something about this issue of Anthropocene, okay? I'm not understand it for you. The Anthropocene, it's the right terminology to understand our geological current condition. What do you think about the debate against the definition of our geological epoca in the sense of Anthropocene? For example, the feministic approach that think that Anthropocene is more, so you know, it's super anthropocentric terminology to understand something like a geological condition just in connection with our human condition. If you think that, for example, we need to use another kind of terminology like, I don't know, Capitalocene or something like that in the framework of, I don't know, Don Haraway. And this is a question that is in connection with the question of Gaia and your answer about the Anthropocene now.
So I'm kind of with Donna Haraway on this. There are lots of problems with the term Anthropocene, referring to this current geological epoch in which the human is set to be, the primary or the key geological agent that really changes the organization of the world. In a way that is stratigraphically significant. So you'll be able to see the kind of human trace after centuries. And also that speeds up certain changes around ocean acidification and pollution through burning of fossil fuels. So all of that, but also through that story of the Anthropocene, the human becomes self-aggrandized, as in, isn't the human amazing? We've managed to mess up the planet. So that becomes a story as well of almost human greatness, while at the same time talking about how rubbish we've been because we've created, we've turned the planet into rubbish. So I'm aware of all of this and how not all social groups, geographical groups have contributed equally to the destruction of the planet, how it's a political question as well. So I'm aware of this, but I'm with Donna Haraway on it because it recognizes that we could use all these other terms. And I think the debate that has happened has been really important, exciting in the humanities, people coming up with terms like plantational scene or oil scene or Cthulhu of Haraway. But also I think that does make sense to continue with the Anthropocene because it opens something up. So we can have especially in the ambience of humanities and the ambience of art, we can have an opening up of this term, probing it from different angles. But also I think it's worth continuing in it because a certain trajectory has been established. And also it's one of the few kind of situations when suddenly humanities and scholars and artists and scientists come together to talk about something. So rather than argue about the term, suddenly a sense of a joint project emerges. But as I said earlier, again, as always, with groups of humans coming together, there is going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of disagreement. So for me, it would be better not to waste that energy on arguing over the terms too much, I suppose.
Thank you, Professor Zylinska. Thank you.
And now I want to, I opened the Q&A section and it's full of questions. So I try to resume a couple of them and to start with them. First one, how do you envision the role of AI, let me say, but also virtual reality? And there's a specific question about virtual reality in the next time. I mean, you have been focusing your last book and this presentation on artificial intelligence. On the other side, the second big tech paradigm is so defined usually virtual reality. How do you approach this topic?
The kind of topic of VR would be would be of interest to me with regard to my current work, which is on perception. So, and I'm developing the work I've done on AI by looking at both human vision, the way we see the world, and machine vision, the way it's implemented now in self-driving cars, in kind of facial recognition and things like that. And I'm interested as well in not just whether machines can see, or at the moment they can't see really, not in any meaningful sense of the word, just to decide that in advance and clarify that, but also how our human perception is changing in the current situation. And VR is interesting because we live so much kind of surrounded by screens. Our constant, I've got about 3 different ones here. And I'm sure, people, we also constantly have a little screen attached to our hands in the shape of our phone. So we don't even need goggles anymore to live in a kind of VR. So maybe VR is a technology in which you kind of enter an alternative reality and have this sensuous multisensory experience. I think also becomes a paradigm as well for living with different forms of images. And I think it's a lot of, because the technology obviously is getting better, people are getting less dizzy when they put their kind of helmet on and goggles on, do something. I think it can open something up for when it comes to our understanding as well of ourselves as perceiving being, of what it means to see, how we can see, but also it can change the research in machine vision as well, which I think at the moment machine vision is premised on a very instrumental understanding of vision as basically kind of data processing in the brain. And I think some work in VR, virtual reality, can actually teach and show us that, perception vision is much more corporeal, haptic, and much more 3D. And that can also shift some of the parameters. So that would be a call as well for researchers, scientists, engineers in VR and AI to kind of work together, maybe machine vision and VR together.
Thank you very much. I go on with a couple of more questions. From Donato Medici, how can we be a technical being with a soul that cannot be replicated by a technical machine?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, let's start from this one.
Mm-hmm. So the question of the soul obviously speaks of some kind of human uniqueness. And that would be interesting to declare, what is this uniqueness? Is this just, is this our sense of being unique? Is that the soul? Is that our feelings? If we can we replicate the soul in the machine? If suddenly it looks like the soul because it passes a very sophisticated version of Turing test, it laughs and behaves, it jokes, is ironic, can paint a picture, can paint a kind of art that surprises us, does it have it? So maybe we can, maybe we can't. I'm very suspicious about the promises made in the names of AI. And I love a lot of kind of science fiction experiments, visual as well as kind of literary, because they open up imagination. But in terms of planning, I don't think we're anywhere near the kind of arrival at that kind of replication of universal kind of AI. So that kind of is interesting and kind of opens up different kind of dimensions. So yes, the question of the soul, whether there is something unique, what is it that is unique about humans? Is it, the soul? Is it our self-consciousness? Is it our awareness of something? Would we be able to replicate it? I don't have an answer to this, but it's something that I think is worth probing, and that obviously philosophy literature probes very well.
Thank you. And now, since really this chat is full of questions, I go on with the following one. It is from Gabriela Galati, and she says, "Hello, Joanna, very inspiring talk. Thank you. Seeing Mora's work reminded me of Michel Blazy's work, Le Lâcher d'Escargot, in which he gives beer to snails, which apparently they love, in exchange of a snails painting for him a very big canvas. Blasé sees this as a form of domestication that doesn't imply exploitation, but mutual benefit and collaboration. So I was wondering if you consider possible a form of creativity that brings together the human and the machinic in partnership. Because of course, as you said, there is a continuity between our being living beings and prosthetic beings. So not in terms of neurocapitalism or exploitation, but of hybridization and mutual benefit. That's blasé. Something that may escape the logic of Silicon Valley, because even though we may consider to be using our computer and AI, it seems that exploitation where, at Bogost calls it, is each day more difficult to avoid or escape, and so the exit strategy is not so clear. Okay,
Yes.
quite a complex statement,
Okay, yeah,
but
no, but,
the idea is
yes,
clear.
yes. Hi, Gabriela. Thank you for the cracking question. And so the way I would approach it, I mean, I think it's obviously a thought-provoking project, and that form of collaboration. I mean, obviously, there is something happens, and something happens here in that kind of exchange that is not just fully controlled by the human, that lets in this other animal other into into that relationship with the human. But we also have to understand that the idea of making a picture and the idea of this exchange and the idea of this being validated and co-creation, they're all concepts put together by the human. So it would be interesting, and obviously we can't, the same way as we don't know, as Thomas Nagel has argued, we don't know what it is like to be a bat. We can have a fantasy of what it's like to be a bat. We can approximate, we can try, but we don't really know the feeling, the sensation. We also don't know what it's like for those kind of slimes or snails to actually be involved in that project. So something occurs in that relationship, and obviously something there, but by itself, those animals, insects, reptiles, whatever kind of species, mosquitoes we mobilize, they might not have joined that relationship. Now, Haraway, obviously, as you probably know, in her idea of companion species, talking about relationship with dogs, she says, well, dogs might not want to be trained or not volunteer to be trained, and yet they are getting happy, or they are kind of benefiting from that relationship as well, because training doesn't just satisfy human desire to train them, it also gives something to dogs in terms of their musculoskeletal development, their pleasure, bodily pleasure in being in certain spaces. Obviously, we project that dogs can't tell us this, but in some ways they can tell us through other forms of communication. So here it's interesting as well to say what drives the human in producing that. If we name it a picture, we name it a painting, we're already returning to a very human way of creating forms of culture that carry a particular value. It's not to say that other animals are incapable of culture. They might have very sophisticated cultures and very sophisticated forms of communication about which we know very little. But I do think it still raises the question, and obviously it's not a question of here neurocapitalism or straight exploitation, but neither do I think it's just a question of collaboration, because there is something else there that is worth probing, but it's also worth questioning the motivation, the desire, the interest of the human instigating that relationship. But any form of relationship we enter with other humans as well, there is often one person, one party, one side. There's dominating, there's instigating something. And any act, as we know from Levinas, from Derrida, even some forms of violence as well, can also be ethical. They don't always have to be kind of condemned, but obviously you have to proceed very carefully here, because it's not to allow violence, it's not to and it's using the term violence in a very philosophical sense, very open, so we have to be very, very careful not to legitimate behaviors that would be harmful, that would be unethical. So I think that's my roundabout way of answering.
Thank you. And I go on, maybe if you want Leonardo to raise some
it's
questions.
as we can see, it's full of questions. Okay,
Yes.
so for there is also some funny question, like for example, something about your background. What is your background? This is one of the questions that I can see. I don't know if you want to answer to.
And in background, I don't know if the people meant academic or is that the question of what do I
No,
do?
about the Zoom background. Okay, this is the reason why it's a funny.
I wanted some kind of I would almost like reveal my life story to you, but no, okay then. It's the background. It's from a project I recently kind of finished. It's actually premiering tomorrow at a festival in Porto, and the project is called Neuromatic. And for this, I worked with these GANs algorithms, and I'm not a programmer. I'm quite, my computer skills are quite limited, as in, you know, so I can switch on Zoom. But I work with the algorithms and prepared by the Runway ML, machine learning for artists, and also with the art breeder algorithm. So you can get simple instructions, a fantastic resource for artists. And for this project, I did a project on perception, as I mentioned. So I took images from Wellcome Collection, which is a repository of photographs of eyes and brains across history. It's medical images. So I took these images, they're open access from that repository, and I reprocessed them by this algorithm provided by Artbreeder. Algorithm that sees a certain way. So you feed them certain images and they spit something out that they think is then an eye. So this is a quarter of an eye spat out by the GAN network that made its way into my video.
Another short question that comes from Gaia Longobardi, but it's an interesting question in my opinion. What do you mean, Professor Zylinska, when you say, have we always been artificial intelligence?
Mm-hmm. So I think that links with our earlier discussion with Professor Bianchi about the idea that we've always been technical. So obviously, so we've always been technical. I hope we've explained that in the sense that, you know, technology in its simple form, it's not computers, not internet, but technology like fire, like sticks, like stones has been with us for a very long time. And to say that we have always been artificially intelligent is a certain riff on that idea. So I'm kind of playing here and putting it out as a provocation. So what I mean by this is that even our intelligence, our forms of understanding the world, intelligence as a way of making connections, kind of concluding, being able to think in abstract ways, is dependent on external relations. It almost comes from elsewhere. We've only developed cognition, consciousness, intelligence, but, you know, through relations with other people, but also with technologies, with infrastructures, with agriculture, with animals, with all these other things. So that's what I mean, that our intelligence, what we see as this feature of the human, intelligence has depended on other things, on other earlier technologies. If we agree that, you know, architecture, yes, but agriculture is a technology, for example, or hunting, or things, or even clothing, making clothes, you know. So in the sense that we've emerged who we are as humans through, you know, and in our intelligence and our consciousness through that kind of form. But obviously now what we call artificial intelligence today, that I'm saying it's only one very specific incarnation of that. And obviously what artificial intelligence AI now tries to do is replicate that human intelligence in machines. But I'm saying that ours has kind of always been, we've emerged through in that relationship with externalities.
Thank you. And now I try to sum up 3 or 4 questions. I mean, here in our audience, a lot of people are 20, 25 years old. Okay, some of them are still students, some of them are starting a professional career. And the point is, okay, what kind of future we should try to figure out? I rephrase, how can I deal with such technologies, okay, when I am a designer, a media designer, graphic designer, and so on, and basically my projects, my profession will be for sure in connection, in relationship with digital tools, current digital tools, but digital tools of the future. I mean, USO outlined, okay, 2045 will be according to Ray Kurzweil the year of singularity, the year in which we supposedly will have a turning point in the history of human beings, and the relation human-machine will be reverted.
So yes, the future, I think the most important thing about this future is to assume that the future, asking the question of the future is a task. So in a way I would answer, and I would say that to the students, to future designers, future artists, future architects, programmers, it's take the question of the future seriously. And obviously, because I think the problem is maybe, and both was in relation to our kind of highly capitalist society, and in relation to the climate mess we are in, it's maybe because the question of the future hasn't been taken seriously for those in power, at least for a very long time. You know, we know that politicians can't think about the future long term. They can think about their own future. You know, will I be elected? Should I do this? Should I do that? But suddenly all the different developments, including kind of the corona events, have put the question of the future on the table. And obviously AI also puts the question of the future on the table and longer term future. And I think the younger generation, and I learn about this from my students as well, they are much more aware. They are much more precarious. They are aware of their own precarity. Many people, they are aware that they're going to be less wealthy maybe than their parents' generation, because certain things we took for granted are being taken away. On the other hand, they are much more kind of aware of the planetarity of their own situation, if you like. And I think this is amazing. So that realization that the future is a shared project, and that whatever career, whatever job, whatever creative profession you're in, kind of figuring out the question of the future through whatever you do, in whatever teams, groups, relations, companies you work with, is quite important, and allowing yourself to think in kind of these larger scales. And that involves as well looking back at kind of larger scales, looking back at history, including the kind of deep time, planetary time.
Absolutely. Yes, we should introduce in schools subjects and courses, something like a theory and method of future. That's correct. Because
yes,
really,
yeah.
we are reshaping the way we understand our connection with time. And really, it's the second generation having the possibility to rethink entirely it. You know, when we read the fathers of contemporary digital culture, they had, for instance, Nicolas Negroponte in Being Digital. He's writing obsessively, we will, we will, we will. He created a design of the future that then was implemented. So really think about the future, and it's what Zuckerberg is doing right now, is what Kurzweil is doing right now, and so on. So focus on the issues of the future is absolutely important. And another question, and then I leave word again to Leonardo, because we have, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. Let's try to go on. Luca Saladini, thank you for the great talk, and ask, regarding the auction at Christie's, where a painting was sold for 400,000, made by the portrait of Edward Bellamy, as far as I can remember, was sold for 100,000 euros. That it was produced by an AI. Who is the artist in this case? Because that's a great question mark, not only in art, in all the processes involving AI. I mean, for instance, when AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol in 2016 at Go, the Google programmers of AlphaGo said, hello, that's us who won. It was not the artificial intelligence, okay? So here again, in the art, who is the artist in this case? And also, let me add, the art market is ready or not to accept a different idea of the authorship of the work?
Well, that's why this kind of story of, work being sold at Christie's, I saw it more as a kind of PR kind of opportunity. So I was quite suspicious of this, and the debate it generated was interesting, of course, and the question of who is the artist is very important. It's a great question that we all can be, and I think, but that event in itself, you know, generating works of art that look like a little bit like, you know, something we can recognize, big Van Gogh, Edward Bellamy, you know, Microsoft has printed another Rembrandt, as we saw. So these PR opportunities, obviously, they kind of are done there to gain, to draw attention to some kind of programming behind this. But it's not to say only that the programmers are artists here, because I think the whole event points to the distributed idea of artistic creativity through centuries. And as we said, artists often produce things when fully on drugs, you know, they were completely off their heads and they produced something. You know, who was it? Was it like mescaline that produced it? Or was it, you know, their soul and was it, you know, artists produced when they had high fever? Artists produced unconsciously with automatic writing and surrealist. Was it their unconscious? Was it there? But also, you know, people, very many male artists had a whole kind of, you know, their wives who did a lot of work for them and then they hid it. So the question of distributed artistic agency and the fact that, you know, works have been produced through centuries, you know, so-called, you know, genius paintings were often produced as part of big kind of workshops that you would go and, you know, now you're trying to verify, well, this is a real Tizian or no, this is just like, you know, this is like a sidekick did that. But obviously we can't ever be 100% sure until Tizian just comes and says, yeah, me, not me, or I don't remember this one. So that idea of distributed agency, distributed artistry, that has existed through centuries, very interesting. And those events, I think, put that on the table. When it comes to the future of art market, I don't think it's going to be like, well, you know, if only because artists are too busy. So if AI produces more works that look like pretty or that sell, it's just gonna, I don't know, deflate the prices. Because I think you can do such shticks like once or twice, but after a while, people will become bored with this. Especially if it's a kind of imitative work, if it looks like something we recognize. But mobilizing AI art, like in that case with Leon Olmura, who's got these little, these little tracks going on the canvas and doing all these kinds of things. So that's interesting because it also opens another conversation. So somebody else asked in chat, can art change as a result of this? And I think that is possible. That is, you know, art can change the discourse about art, our understanding of what art is. It's not to say it will improve, that we will paint better, I don't know, faster, I don't know, the brush strokes will be better. No, in that sense, but more expanding the notion of what counts as art, provoking new questions, provoking new relations. In that sense, I think the relationship or collaborations with AI can do something thought-provoking, I think, for the discipline of art, for the category of art, but also for the market.
Yes, thank you. In fact, there's an issue, maybe not in the art market, but in several other industries. For instance, the car, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's liable when, let me say, artificial intelligences take decisions. We will see it.
Yes.
Leonardo, I think we have room for the last question and then...
So I don't know, it's another question, for example, that comes from this moral framework, if you want, Professor Zylinska, is a question of, sorry, because now the chat is, of Veronica Postacchini, okay, and the question is more or less, what fundamental rights should we have to interrogate the data sets, algorithms, and so on being used to make decisions on our behalf?
So the question of what fundamental rights should we have? I mean, we already have a certain, obviously, a number of both moral and political frameworks. I mean, political frameworks are laws. So, and I think for the question of, you know, should robots have rights? Should algorithms have rights? Which often gets raised as well. I think, you know, on the one hand, obviously, we have forms of regulation, and maybe the political discourse is more important actually here than the discourse of moral philosophy. So the discourse of regulation the discourse of kind of permissions. I think European Commission, I think, is doing quite a lot of interesting work around understanding our relationships with our algorithm. So maybe for me, the question of moral, and the area of moral philosophy, it's not the first terrain on which I think the most important things should happen, even though this is the question that often gets asked. And, a lot of companies have moral philosophers employed, but very often, I'm quite cynical about this. I think they often employ moral philosophers to get them off the hook, to just say, yeah, we've cleared that with ethics, so we can go on and do what we want to do. But that's why questions of regulation, questions of kind of political kind of arrangements, questions of how would we like society to be as a result of those particular interactions with algorithms, I think are probably more important questions, rather than just staying in the domain of rights and in the domain of kind of individual responsibility of a particular algorithm or programmer.
I completely agree with you. I don't know, Amos, probably it's enough, or if you want,
Yes,
because we are full of questions, but I suppose that our time is over.
Our time is over, absolutely. Let me just say that the next lecture with Stefano Quintarelli will be about this topic. In this global process of dematerialization, Stefano Quintarelli is also advisor for the European Commission exactly about this theme. What political choices to make when we have to deal with these issues in order to guarantee the rights and the good life for our citizens at large. So I think I think okay, our time is over, and it was extremely dense, challenging, and interesting what we said. I hope that I saw that we started with around 300 participants, and it's exactly the same amount of people at the end of this conference. So I'm very pleased that we had the chance to stay here with you, Joanna, for half an hour discussing such meaningful issues. And before I thank you, I leave a word to you and Leonardo just to conclude. I just simply remind that in the next days, the recording of this half an hour will be available on YouTube channels of NABA in Triennale. So it will be possible for us to review it. And I close here. Leonardo, Joanna, to end this very intense night.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation, and thank you for attendance. And I've been honored to have been invited and to have been able to speak to you all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Professor Zylinska, and also thank you very much, Amos Bianchi. It was really a pleasure to stay with you and see you for the next conference with Stefano Quintarelli. Thanks to our public today, and sorry for the other questions, but after the time it's over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.